In this video, we're going to be talking about where are the x and y intercepts on a graph. Now, we've seen this concept before. Go ahead and just sketch yourself a little graph like this. Draw a line. We have seen this before. We have talked about, right, this is a line, this kind of graph, and this is the only kind of graph we've talked about so far is a line. And we have talked about on those graphs, we have talked about intercepts, especially when we talked about standard form, right? We would find the y-intercept and we'd graph it. This is the y-intercept, and we talk about the x-intercept and we'd graph it. Now, why is this called the y-intercept? Here, that is where the line hits the y-axis. And here, this is the x-intercept, and that is where this line hits the x-axis, right? This here, this is the x-axis. Okay, and this up and down line here, that's the y-axis. So notice the y-intercept is on the y-axis and the x-intercept is on the x-axis. Okay, so this is not new information. This we've learned before. So now, what I'm about to show you is not really new information. But today we're going to be starting to look at graphs that look like this. That kind of U shape. And this shape is called a parabola. And that is the shape that we get when we graph quadratic equations. So, for example, if I graph something like x squared plus 3x plus 2, I will get a shape that looks like this. Okay, now, a parabola also has intercepts, right? Let's start with the y-intercept, right? Remember that this is the y-axis here. And so the y-intercept, is the point where the parabola hits the y-axis. So this is the y-intercept. Okay, now the thing is, there's actually two x-intercepts, right? Because this parabola hits the x-axis here and here, right? Here's the parabola, and here's the x-axis, and it actually intersects twice. So there's actually two x-intercepts. These are both x-intercepts. And often with parabolas, there are two. Okay? Sometimes there'll be one. Sometimes a parabola will come and just like touch right here on the x-axis and then come back up. That would be one, right? Sometimes a parabola will just be up here and it won't hit the x-axis. That would be 0. But oftentimes there are two, and pretty much the ones we see today will have two. Okay, so here's what you need to remember about our intercepts. Let's talk about x-intercepts first. If you look at all these points, all these x-intercepts are on the x-axis. So think about the coordinates of these points. Like this might be -3, 0. This might be -2, 0. This might be 4, 0. But notice there's always, always, always a number, comma, 0. Right? X-intercepts are always the number along the x-axis and then 0 in the y-coordinate. Okay, so for example, your x-intercept might be something like 3, 0, or might be something like -5, 0. Okay, now the y-intercepts are the opposite. Right? The y-intercepts are on the y-axis. Think about the coordinates of this point. This might be 0, 3. This might be 0, -7, whatever it is, right? But here the x-coordinate is 0 and the y-coordinate is the number wherever it is on the y-axis. So for example, your y-intercept will be a number that looks like this, 0, 2, or 0, -4, right? Something like that. Right? And then just something to be aware of, a little pro tip, because this happens sometimes. If a line or a parabola crosses the graph, and I'm going to pause here and give you the audio word. The code word is cat, like the animal cat, C-A-T. If a line or a parabola crosses the graph at the origin, that's the middle of the graph, then 0, 0, right? Notice there's a 0 in both the x and the y coordinate, okay, that would be both an x and y intercept. Oops, an x and y-intercept. Okay, so just something to be aware of. Sometimes students will run into a graph that crosses at the origin. They'll be like, oh, is that the x or the y-intercept? It could be both, right? If a graph were to go right through here, then that intersects both the y-axis and the x-axis. All right. And for the next 3 questions, questions 4, 5, and 6, you can use the bottom of this page if you find that you want to write anything down. So you can just set yourself up some workspace right there. You may find that you don't need to write anything down, which is fine too.